I'm Gary. I'm an alcoholic, and welcome to the Saturday night recovery meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Tonight is a working step meeting, and we're going to meet for approximately 1.5 hours without a break. And out of respect for others, we request that you refrain from cross-talking or commenting while others are sharing. And if you just remember to stay muted while people are sharing, that would be appreciated. And yeah, we just wanted to also say a little bit of a shout out to the people that are tuning in from Ukraine and Poland that are following along. I know you're not necessarily on here tonight, but it's fantastic that you're following along in spirit. And we're just going to open the meeting right now with a moment of silence to remember those of us that are still out and suffering in and out of these rooms. And then we'll follow that by the set aside prayer. Thank you. So the short version is, God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, recovery, you and the 12 steps, that I might have an open mind and a new experience. Amen. And we just wanted to do a quick review on step 11, which is where we left off. And I thought, I was looking for ways to kind of summarize it. And what really hit me when I was reviewing some of the materials is the last paragraph from step 11 in the 12 by 12. So I'm just going to read through it and leave it at that. It says, all this should be very encouraging news for those of us who recoil from prayer because they don't believe in it or because they feel themselves cut off from God's help and direction. All of us, without exception, pass through times when we can pray only for the greatest exertion of will. Occasionally, we even go further than this. We are seized with rebellion so sickening that we simply won't pray. When these things happen, we should not think too ill of ourselves. We should simply resume prayer as soon as we can, doing what we know to be good for us. And what's good for us is the part that I really love here. It says, perhaps one of the greatest rewards of meditation prayer is the sense of belonging that comes to us. We no longer live in a completely hostile world. We're no longer lost and frightened and purposeless. The moment we catch even a glimpse of God's will, the moment we begin to see the truth, justice and love as real and eternal things in life, we are no longer deeply disturbed by the seeming evidence to the contrary that surrounds us in purely human affairs. We know that God lovingly watches over us. We know that when we turn to Him, all will be well with us here and hereafter. And what I love about that is, it's talking about the fact that, the things that are important in life are the spiritually natured, the things of a spiritual nature, not necessarily the, wealth that we have or the things that we have, the things that we have in human form. It's, our whole attitude and outlook on life, and I love that line from step 9. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change, and that's been my experience walking through these steps. And by focusing on prayer and meditation, that's an amazing, where part of that significant psychic change or spiritual awakening comes from. So with that, we're going to move into step 12. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill to get us started.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jill, and I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. Tonight, we're going to go through the first 2 parts of step 12. And I don't know if you have it in front of you, but it says, step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And when you're looking at that step, you can see that it very easily breaks into 3 pieces. The first being having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, and the second being we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. And tonight we're going to cover 2 of those 3, the first 2. So it's going to be a little bit of a marathon, but on our final meeting next week, when you graduate, we want you to have a little time to be able to comment and reflect on what we're doing. So I'm going to start with the reading. It is important to remember that our program is one of attraction. We're not called upon to go out to our local saloon and recruit members. The best 12th step work we can do is by example. Using the tools of the program, we are called upon to go out there and participate in a full, rich, and creative life. There is a danger of, quote, hiding in the fellowship. It is a safe and protective haven, and that's like a cozy little place to go to. But it is not recovery. Once we are well anchored in the program, we got a solid foundation. Once we have secured foothold in reality, it is time to take risks. Often, it's a trial and error process. Slowly, we establish a new value system. We find our true identities and live them to the fullest, receiving strength and courage from our fellow members, sponsor, and higher power. When going on a 12-step call, it is important that we not go alone. Also, it is often a waste of time to talk to someone while they are drunk. Oh, I know that one.
Been there, done that.
The best time is the morning after. I love this straightforward advice. When they are hungover and most contrite. In other words, they're in that shame mode. Remember, the quotes say, we carry the message, not the drunk. Whether on a 12-step call or at a meeting, always speak in the I form and never in the you. I didn't know this when I first started sharing, that it's important to keep it about what I experience and not tell you what to do. So I really am glad that this is giving me a very clear instruction about what to do at a meeting. Talk in the I voice. We are to share our own strength, hope, and experience, not someone else's. We are not there to teach, threaten, exhort, or force, warn, or advise. That is the area of a sponsor, a therapist, a counselor, or a doctor, but that's not our job. We tell our story and trust that their higher power will guide them to identify with us. So this is when you're talking to somebody who hasn't made up their mind about going into the program. All you can share is what went on with you. What happened to Jill, what happened to everyone else in this room. So we did, and this is really important. I put a star and highlighted this one. I've said, we did not make the person drink, nor can we make that person sober. And that's really important to listen to that one. We did not make that person drink, nor can we make that person sober. And that's the basis for Al-Anon too. It's basically also saying, I do the footwork, the outcome is down to my higher power. And it also says, and we trust the outcome to their higher power. It's not about me, it's not about the person suffering, it's down at the end of the day to higher power. It is important to recognize and accept our own limitations. We're just human. Not all are gifted in speaking to a potential new member. That might not be your bag. There are many ways to do 12th step work. And that includes from setting up at a meeting to holding an office in a group or writing into the grapevine and telling your story. From being a sponsor, if that's your thing, to sharing at a meeting or giving a ride to someone who needs one. Or from being in general service, like a GSR for a group, and attending AA social events. Or by simply going for coffee with members after a meeting. Some of the best service we can be is in the parking lot, and we'll hear more about this later. Okay, so with no further ado, we're going to jump right into the Little Red Book. We're on step 12, and what I've done in mine is I have divided that step and circled it into the 3 parts that it's actually divided into. So the first part where it says the aim of this interpretation is to give the working mechanics. In other words, we're going to tell you how this thing works. And I love this, guys. You're in for a treat because it's really clear directions. All references are from a reliable source of information. So the content of this is taken from Alcoholics Anonymous, Chapter 7, How It Works. But it's said in a much different way. We can arrive at in a more of a summary, and I don't mean that by it gives a different message. It's just much more blunt. We can arrive at an understanding and practice of this step by studying each of the 3 divisions. So the first part I've circled there is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That's what we're going to have the next few pages I'm going to read, and I'm going to give you the 6 key ideas that go with having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So that's first division. Since this is an interpretation of established AA concepts, it would be inconsistent to mince words over spiritual values or to withhold the fact that a spiritual awakening, so there's your highlight, okay, at the bottom of that page, a spiritual, and it goes on to page 120. A spiritual awakening is an essential part of our recovery. That's key idea number 1. And what is that? Essential. A breakthrough in denial is a spiritual awakening. That's what an essential means. You have to have a breakthrough in denying. Providentially for us, at least 6 of the 12 steps are of a spiritual nature. Knowing the fallacies of alcoholic thinking, it is inconceivable that we could recover from alcoholism without spiritual inspiration, dependent on some power greater than our own. We get this inspiration and come to know God by living the 12 steps. Without the spiritual principles of the 12 steps, there could be no AA. Instead, and if you've got your highlighter ready, this is the next key idea too, there would be a group of disgruntled alcoholics temporarily on the wagon, living in a perpetual state of mental drunkenness. So this is essentially saying, without this spiritual, I am mentally drunk. And that leads to a state of relapse. So that's key idea 2. Temporarily on the wagon, living in a perpetual state of mental drunkenness. So you might not have picked up the bottle, but you can't really say that you're mentally sober either. Lacking the benefit of spiritual influence, the jungle law of resentful alcoholic thinking would take over and drive each member back to the insanity of alcoholism. And that's the warning. Our sobriety demands a personality change. We've seen that throughout the big book. And in step 1, they talk about the psychic change, the personality change over and over again. And right here, it's very directly saying our sobriety demands a personality change. We gain this in the form of a spiritual awakening. And we're going to get to this in great detail. What's a spiritual awakening? From living the program.
Jill, I just wanted to say on that note, I think I mentioned last week, but also another simple difference, I guess you'd call it, is something that is explained to me too. Is I spent a lot of time trying not to drink, and I was focused on the problem, trying not to drink, And what this program gives you is the opportunity to learn how to live sober, like live in the solution. And that's exactly what this is talking about, Trying not to drink doesn't bring anything to the table. It's just living in a state of fear. Whereas when you learn to live sober by following these steps, you're completely changing the way you think. It's, if you want to call it, it's AA brainwashing. You're cleaning my thinking. getting rid of old ideas and starting to allow some room for new ideas to come in. And that's part of why we do the set aside prayer at the beginning of each night. It's, you're never too old or too experienced in this program to get something new out of it if you just let your mind be open to what you're hearing. So, just wanted to add that in.
I love that. Thank you, Gary. Are we really spiritually awakened, or is it chance, fear, self-will, or alcoholic rationalization that keeps us sober? If it's the latter, then what fills us with the enthusiasm and the desire to carry the message to other alcoholics? Can this worthy motive result from chance, fear, or self-centeredness? I think not. Those were my character defects, and I really enjoy passing this message on. It says that, fills us with the enthusiasm and the desire to carry the message to other alcoholics. I love doing this Saturday nights. I don't know what I'm going to do after the end of next Saturday. That's certainly something that's a spiritual awakening. Okay? Who grants us the power to stop drinking and continue abstinence? Who grants us the power to help other alcoholics stop drinking? Who grants us the desire to help them stop? What gives others the power to acquire and pass on the miracle of sobriety? Is it possible for alcoholics to arrest the physical allergy and the mental obsession of alcoholism by their own power? We think not. And medicine concurs. We don't do this alone. Alcoholics who try to disprove this theory end up drunk. Doesn't get much blunter than that, right? I love this. Obviously, there are but two answers to these questions. First, those who accept and try to live all of the 12 steps seldom fail in AA.
I think the key word there too is try.
Try.
Exactly. It's like seeking, just try. That's all you need to do to get some success.
Absolutely. It's not perfection. We're progress, not perfection. Second, those who skip their spiritual principles seldom succeed. So it's either like get the spiritual or really the odds are not in your favor. Evidently, we require spiritual aid to attain the mental stability conducive to the sobriety we wish to enjoy. Okay, so now I don't know if this is an actual survey that occurred in AA, but it's written here as if it is something that was surveyed at one point. So here we go. A survey in which several hundred AA members were interviewed disclosed many interesting opinions concerning the relation of spiritual awakening to their sobriety. So here's where we're going to dig into spiritual awakening. Only members with 1 year or more of sobriety were contacted. So they've had a year, and there's a good chance maybe they've done their steps. The following questions were casually put to each member. And it says, try these questions in a group meeting. They bring out excellent discussion. Well, I bet they do. Fasten your seatbelt. Here's question 1. Did you have a spiritual awakening? 2, was it vital, in other words, life-giving to your recovery? 3, when did it take place? And 4, I love this one, can you define it? Of those interviewed, most agreed they had undergone a, and this is key idea number 3, have your highlighters ready, a profound personality change for the better. Now, what is a personality change? It's a change of attitude. We've been reading about this in the big book, the psychic change, the personality change. Only 2 people that were in this survey laid claim to revolutionary spiritual transformations, or in other words, the big white lightning. So if you feel like your spiritual growth is of the more gradual kind, join 98% of people. Both groups conceded the importance of a, here it comes again, circle it, personality change, second time in 3 sentences. It says the importance of a personality change to their sobriety and saw the evidence, okay, fact basis of a spiritual awakening in their willingness to accept God's help as they face the problems of sober living. So this is how do we get on in life once the drink has been put down. Okay, and it's the personality change there for me that is my personal awakening, but we'll get into that later. Few members could recall when this had taken place. So we're talking about when did your personality change, your evidence of a spiritual awakening happening. In many cases, close associates had noticed it first. In other words, other people see it in us before we do. That's often the case. They say, "Oh, you're looking better," or, you seem to be getting this, they see the lights come back in our eyes. Some were unable to define their conscious contact with God, yet each one claimed enough to stay sober. Their experiences started with surrender of their character defects to God as they understood Him, and grew as they relied upon Him instead of alcohol and self. In other words, you're switching a higher power. It's no longer alcohol or the substance or whatever the focus of your addiction is. You're relying on Him with the capital H there, meaning the God of your understanding. Opinions about spiritual awakenings taken from members internationally had common denominators of, here we go, and they list them here. Faith is 1, surrender is 2, humility is 3, tolerance is 4, and beautifully, number 5 is love. These elements cannot be listed in any order of importance. Each was important to the one who gave it. Now, here are some of the convictions. So these are going to be responses to this question. And I want you to really think about as I read these. And what I did is I went through these, and there's going to be 12 of them. Think about where you might have had a spiritual awakening similar to this. So let's look for the similarities. It doesn't mean that there's no score here. Like if you had 11 out of the 12, you don't get a gold star. We're just looking for you to relate to what and help you identify some of your spiritual awakenings. Okay, so here's number 1 answer to the question. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when, number 1, I realized that something had kept me away from that first drink. Now that's a tick for me. Like I couldn't do it on my own. Something was doing it. When my former skepticism about God left me, and I took on more, circle it, faith in AA. When I felt gratitude and humbly expressed it in a prayer to God as I understood Him. So the number 2 response now, this isn't in any order of importance. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when I attended an AA meeting. I was greatly impressed by the talk of a 6-month member who, obviously, was nothing short of contented sobriety. His willingness to come clean set me thinking. I had been sober for 2 years, but not happy about it. The next day, I took step 5 with an understanding clergyman. That was the start of my spiritual awakening. So for someone else here, it was step 5. Number 3, it is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when my intelligence made me realize that there must be a power working within me, apart from my physical being, that had given me sobriety and peace of mind, both at the same time. And 4, it is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when I first became aware of the good things I had that deserved gratitude and felt concern. That was a big one for me. First time I started caring about you guys, I realized something was really wrong. Enough for the needs of others to try and help them. Like that's a psychic change if I ever needed one. When through dependence upon a higher power, I remained sober and I regained confidence in myself again. Well, I'm here. That's certainly a psychic change. And it gave me back the confidence to not only do this sort of thing, but enjoy it. Number 5. Okay. You guys know the question by now. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when, 5, I willingly accepted my own, there's the focus, own understanding of God. Willingly accepted my own understanding of God, not the ideas of someone else, but my own understanding. And that certainly was the case for me because I didn't have a God of any understanding when I came in these rooms. And I remember Gary saying, group of drunks, let's just think of this group, or great outdoors. And that really resonated with me. But that has grown so much over time, my own understanding. And now I can say I had a spiritual awakening as I developed my own understanding. And I realized that my God was always inside of me. I just got disconnected. Another spiritual awakening. Number 6. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when 6, I called an AA for help and was treated with understanding, friendship, and compassion by my sponsors. What is that? That's love. That's love. That's one of the 5 things that were just listed before. Okay, it is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when I fully admitted my helplessness as an alcoholic and knew that it would take power outside of my own to save me from the insanity or an alcoholic death. That's the gift of desperation there. My awakening was, and circle it, progressive. And as we said earlier, that is the case for most people, to which each, I love this, underline this, to which each step contributed its part. So as Gary explained to me, spiritual awakenings have occurred as we go through these steps, not just at the culmination of them. And number 8, it is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when, at the end of my first month in AA, I was seized with a tremendous compulsion to drink. Halfway into a bar, I asked God for help. And I sometimes forget to do that. It came immediately. I left the place without a drink, with a prayer of gratitude in my heart. Pray to not pick up, whatever it is. Use your God muscle. And then now we're on number 9. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened. We could have this as a game. When 9, after trying to live the spiritual principles of the 12 steps, I became convinced that I'd done my first honest day's work and that I'd really tried to make it a worthy day. It was then that I realized that I had not done it alone. Oh, yeah, for those of us who cheated in our employment when under the influence, or we started to actually function again, that's a spiritual awakening for me too there. So keep looking for your identifications in here. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when, number 10, after my decision in step 3, I started an inventory to find out what was separating me from the God of my childhood. And I underlined this next sentence. The awakening must have started when I discovered my conscience. And my conscience, and I've written there, my God voice. When I listened to it and used it as a deciding factor in judging between right and wrong. Now really think about that. I'm going to repeat it. The awakening must have started when I discovered my conscience or got reconnected to it. When I listened to it and used it as a deciding factor in judging between right and wrong. We don't pick up.
The other way
Okay.
to say that too is we intuitively knew. It's part of that intuition. It's like God's voice speaking to us.
Thank you. I love that. Okay, we've got 2 more. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when I could see the other person's viewpoint and make allowances for the other's shortcomings. Sick man prayer, right? And admit my own. When I commenced to pray for that person's welfare as well as my own. So we wish the healing for the others, and we're not wrapped up in prayers of ourselves. And we know from the work that we did on prayers in this that we are to pray for others, not for ourselves only. And the final one, it is in the game. It is my honest belief that I was spiritually awakened when I started making amends. The first one was favorably received and brought me a wonderful sense of satisfaction and well-being. I suspected this was of spiritual origin. But when I was nearly thrown out of a man's office and did not blow my top on the next call, I knew that God's will, not mine, was guiding me. The finding of this survey did not indicate that time was the essence of a spiritual awakening. So I've written above that, it's going to happen to me in its own time. We're not grading this. Your speed at having your spiritual awakenings, it's not competitive. It's your individual experience. And it's in your own personal higher power's time. It's not something you can push. Nor did the speed of the awakening have any bearing upon its depth or quality. So I may have a white light experience, you may not. But that doesn't mean that it's any less valid. You may have the white light experience, mine's more progressive of the nature. That is my own experience. We aren't playing, competitive awakenings here. Some members acquired it quickly, others required weeks and months of AA effort and association before they were awakened. And here's what they're awakening to an inner feeling of God's presence.
Just on that note, Jill, I was just going to say, one of the things that I noticed or I've discovered along the way was that, I knew I'd had a spiritual awakening. I wasn't sure if I'd had any spiritual experiences, but when I look back in hindsight, once I'd kind of become awakened to what spiritual really meant in my life, I could see in my past examples of spiritual experiences that I couldn't identify because I didn't have the context or the knowledge. But looking back, there was no question that those things had happened in my life. So sometimes we just don't know or don't recognize it until we've got sort of a framework to work with. I'll leave it there.
All right. I love that. Thank you for that. Okay, so regardless of the time or depths of these awakenings, they all occurred to alcoholics as they sensed their character defects and tried to turn them over to God as they understood Him. Were these experiences mere fantasies? Hardly. Sobriety and peace of mind came only with faith and dependence on God's will. The newcomer is slow to recognize a spiritual awakening within the AA way of life. That is why our founders advised, quote, both you and the new man or new woman must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. And that's on page 100, chapter 7. Okay? So it says right here, we need to walk with somebody. This is about sponsorship. We don't try do this alone. Both you and, these are very clear directions, and the new man or woman must walk daily, day by day, in the path of spiritual progress. And that's the newcomer, right? 90 meetings in 90 days. It's a big commitment to take on a new sponsee. But you gauge where they're at and you try and walk with them as close as you can. Few members sense the need or know the importance of AA's spiritual program in the daily upkeep of their sobriety. Lost in the confusing maze of their alcoholic dilemma, they think only in terms of escaping the physical and mental agony of their drinking. All you care about initially, or what I cared about, was just stopping the drinking. The quality, now listen, hear this, the quality of their sobriety does not seem important in the beginning. Entering AA, it was hard to visualize a goal beyond wretched abstinence. Compulsive drinking had us in a bad spot. We could not live with alcohol, yet life seemed impossible without it. AA offered sobriety, but there were strings attached. It came in a spiritual package that some of us refused to accept. This was not surprising, as we'd been in conflict with God's will for many years. Talking with older members, we were advised to stop taking ourselves too seriously. We're not a glum lot, right? And to acquaint ourselves with the program before we started rewriting it. They told us personalities were not changed overnight. You're not going to have this psychic change in 5 seconds. And we should be more open-minded. Circle that. That's an important part here. And patient in working out the many details of our recovery. And that's certainly, as my recovery goes on, it changes. And the details, I listen more and more to my higher power, and my higher power directs where I go. Later, we learned the 12 steps progressively, right? It's building on these steps, helped us to gain this end. As we lived them, this is practicing the steps. So as we live them regularly, in other words, practice them all the time, they tore down the mental barriers of prejudice and self-will that we had set up between God and ourselves. Now that's a loaded sentence. I'm going to repeat it. As we live them regularly, we tear down the mental barrier we have of prejudice, set aside prayer, right? And self-will. We get out of self. And we've set this up between God and ourselves. In other words, we have to get out of our own way to connect with our higher power. And then here's another word that's saying eventually. This living. So what's the eventually? Living them regularly. Practicing this stuff all the time will bring about a spiritual awakening of its own that opened our eyes and gave us an entirely new outlook on, and I love this, life's true values. I've circled and starred that. Life's true values. So that sentence, it starts with eventually, and then it gets to life's true values. And to me, that sentence is another way of saying we're moving from the 1.0 to the 2.0 version of ourself, which is a spiritual being in a physical body. Alcoholics who, and I've circled this, serve themselves, and then the next word is instead of God. So it's me versus God here. Now it's me against my higher power. Invite all forms of trouble. They fall easy prey to mental or physical drunkenness, usually to both. And this is talking about being emotionally drunk. Okay, it's talking about both forms, mental or physical. And it's saying what we're going to fall prey, we're going to fall down, usually to both the physical and the mental, if I serve myself instead of God. Those are strong words. Occasionally, members assume a sense of false security from sober periods, gained through group association, but without spiritual help. What does that describe? Yeah, meeting members make it, but only to a certain degree. If it's just fellowship, you're not working the program. So that's the caution there about just trying to find the answers to everything in going to just plain old meetings and having social life. I know Meditated 8 and the Bronx and all the Whistler Mountain Group and such, all the meetings in the world wouldn't have helped me get to where I am today if I hadn't been doing these steps and doing them again and again and again, and now with you. We call this the, quote, free ride. It looks like the real thing, but fails to stand up against adversity, resentment, or the physical craving for alcohol. Okay, circle daily spiritual growth, prompted by a desperate need for health, for help. That's the gift of desperation. I don't know about you guys, but I had to be drunk and sobbing on my knees, begging for help to actually reach out for it. And so this is the desperate need. And that is another definition of finding God, gift of desperation. It's the most effective protection against these urges. So you may have had to go somewhere down the scale, but knowing where you are is a good place to help you realize you don't want to go down any further and you still don't want to stay where you're at. God's help plus group association aids this necessary growth. They are the requisites. These are the requirements of a successful AA life. They tend to make us content to live without alcohol. So all three sides of the triangle are represented here. This is an important point, for the difference between contented and unhappy sobriety is often that first drink. If I don't pick up the first one, I don't get drunk. It's as simple as that. But the first one takes me to places I can't, well, you've all been there. It takes no mastermind. You don't have to be a genius to determine the source of power we draw upon in arresting or stopping our alcoholism. Evidence of a spiritual change in our lives can be detected in almost every thought and act. What, aside from spiritual awakening, could ease our fear, resentment, and dishonesty? I never thought I'd be such an honest person. I'm apparently pretty knowing now. What else could curb our mental obsession and physical craving to drink? Oh my gosh, there was nothing that could have stopped me. Nothing. It had to be a power greater than me and everyone else combined. There should be no difficulty in recognizing the essence. Okay, what is an essence? It's the core of a spiritual experience in the, and I love using this adjective, contented sobriety. If your head is spinning and looping all the time, you're not in contented sobriety. And then it says, we enjoy. Yeah, I'm in contented sobriety and I'm loving it. It's the responsibility we daily assume in attitudes of forgiveness, in the amends we make, in willingness to admit our mistakes, in our unselfish interest in helping sick alcoholics and other persons who are less fortunate than ourselves. What is that? That pretty well summarized the steps up right there. So practicing these principles in all our affairs. The spiritual aspects of our lives becomes even more convincing when we discover that these things are done, and I've underlined this, I love this, without thought of personal glory or hope of material gain. Yes, folks, this lawyer now does this for fun and for free. There's no hourly rate. There's no keeping of a time clock. We do this for fun and for free because somebody else did it for fun and for free to pass it on to us. It's the joy of giving, not just the joy of living. Oh, I like that. I'll coin that one. But the outcome of spiritual living, and oh, I love this, is never without reward. God declares his dividends. So what's a dividend? You invested and you got paid back more than you invested. Not in human coinage, and I like this is so poetic, but in the divine currency of serenity. That's what we get. Here's the big gift, and you're going to hear more about serenity. Now, Amy, if you want to pop in at this point, or I see you're going through a toll booth or something now, so I'm just going to keep reading. But here's the homework I gave Amy, and perhaps we'll put the PDF in our materials. So listen to this paragraph. Excerpts from our Southern friend, and that's in quote, in the big book mention this serenity. Okay, we're talking about serenity here. We do the serenity prayer all the time. It says, God produces, listen, this is beautiful, guys. God produces harmony in those who receive his spirit and follows its dictates. So your higher power, however you see it, their direction. Today, when I become more harmonized within, so when I settle down and get into a state of ease, I become more in tune with all of God's wonderful creation. So all of our higher powers creation, we become more aligned with the more we align in these steps. There are periods of darkness, but the stars are shining, no matter how dark the night. There are disturbances, but I have learned that if I seek patience and open-mindedness, understanding comes. And with it, direction by the Spirit of God. And here's this sentence blows me away. The dawn comes, and with it, more understanding, and the joy of living that is not disturbed by circumstances or by people around me. Now, what is that? That is the definition of serenity. The dawn comes, and with it, more understanding. We're moving more into our 2.0 spiritual being, and the joy of living that is not disturbed. So we are now more in our spiritual self because we're not going to be bugged by any person, place, or thing, any circumstance. That's what that's saying. And then Amy is going to copy or make a PDF of that. If you or do you want to pop in and comment on that at all, Amy?
Well, because the whole story is very sweet, and it's one of the early stories, and it's very similar like Bill's story, where he's got a wife and kids, and he keeps drinking, and he goes to the asylum. But that reading that you just read is the best part of the whole story.
Okay.
So otherwise, it's a very similar story. But I do have the PDF, and I'll put it up with the recordings.
And just
Thank you.
to put it in
Okay,
context,
so
that's a story from the first edition of the big book, right? So it's one of the stories that's no longer in the later editions, but it showed up in the first
Correct.
edition of the big book. So if you're really looking for it on your own, you can just go find yourself a copy of the first edition of the big book, and it'll be in there.
well, Amy happens to have one, and
Yeah.
so she's very kindly offered to make a PDF of it and post it in our homework. See, this is a full service operation you guys are getting here. Okay, let's continue. We're on 129 for anyone who's listening to this in Poland or the Ukraine on audio. In the paperback edition, we're at the bottom. The benefits of 12-step living enlarge as we share them with others. So as our circle grows, the benefits, we reap more and more health, we feel higher self-esteem, we move more into our character assets. We are wise to share them, for we cannot suppress the spiritual gifts of AA and maintain satisfying sobriety. So in other words, we have to pass it on. To keep it is not what we do here. We pass it on and then we get to keep it, because in so doing, we are practicing it. Each worthy. Now, what does worthy mean? Worthy means the opposite of self-centeredness. I looked it up. Each worthy thought, put it into practice, brings us a step nearer to God. The 12 steps all lead in that direction. They are like stepping stones that we slowly progress over to a greater awareness of His presence. They are the means by which we make a conscious contact with Him. They stand as spiritual bulwarks. And what is that? A bulwark is a wall of protection between us and lives of desperation and drunkenness. By practicing the steps, we gain the priceless gem of contented sobriety. It is ours to hold as long as we willingly share it with others who sincerely seek our help. So, being useful to God and others gives me spiritual value. That makes me worthy. And that brings me into the 2.0 version. So though that is the end of the first division of the 12-step, and now we're going to move into the second division. So going back to the actual step, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, the second part was we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. Now pay attention for those of you who are trying to help somebody that is still in their addiction.
Before you jump in there, Jill, I just wanted to say, because I love that last line in what we just read, because it says, it is ours to hold as long as we willingly share it with other alcoholics who sincerely seek our help. And it kind of foreshadows the whole next division here. And in my experience, and you've already alluded to it, a lot of people need this program, but not everybody wants it. And if somebody doesn't want it, you can't, it says you can't make somebody else sober. You can't do the work for them. You can't change their thinking. You can only help them if they want it. And it's a very important difference. You can spend a lot of time helping somebody who doesn't want it, and you just get frustrated in your own sobriety, and they don't benefit. There's no benefit. It's like spending hours talking to somebody who's been drinking or still drinking. You wake up the next morning and they don't remember a thing you said. Kept you sober for a few hours, but your time's better spent helping somebody who really truly wants it. And that
Man, I have an $800 phone bill from when I was on holiday in Mexico last year, thinking I learned that lesson the tough way. Wasn't a call that came in on WhatsApp, and the person that I thought I was helping throughout the night had no recollection the next day of even I had the phone bill. And that's again, there's good sage advice in here. So if you're a sponsor or looking at becoming a sponsor, fasten your seatbelts, guys. There's good direction here. So the second division, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. Trying to carry the message of AA to alcoholics who seek our help seems like a mandate from a higher power to the members of our fellowship. Okay, so what is a mandate? It's an official order, or it's a commission to do something. So trying to take the message of AA to alcoholics who seeks our help seems like a mandate from a higher power to the members of our fellowship. It is the premise. What is a premise? The foundation upon which AA was founded to help the still suffering alcoholic. Rendering this service, giving this service, we immunize. Now, what is immunize? Immunize is to make resistant, and I looked it up, to a specific disease. I really like that. This is the medicine for my disease. We immunize ourselves against taking the first drink. If I don't take the first drink, I'm not going to get drunk. I might have stinking thinking, but if I don't pick up the glass or seek the answer in the bottom of a bottle, it isn't going to happen. My looping thinking I can get help with. We help restore faith in God and physical health to drinkers who have lost all hope of recovery from their alcoholic condition. This spiritual grant should not be ignored. Now, hopefully everybody by now knows what a grant is. What is a grant? It's a gift with a condition. God has entrusted recovering alcoholics with a special gift of healing alcoholics who still suffer. This gift was not given to educators, doctors, or clergy members. It was granted, there it is again, to us, so we might justify our right to live sober, normal lives. And how do we do that? By helping other alcoholics recover from their illness. When we assume this responsibility of carrying this message, we do not consider it presumptuous to suggest a general outline for sponsoring newcomers in AA. So here's some really good directions if you're struggling with someone who's struggling in the program. The following suggestions are based upon advice found in Chapter 7, you guys know the chapter, Working with Others, of Alcoholics Anonymous, and upon the experience of successful AA members who have followed that advice. Okay, what you're about to get is a Cole's Notes on sponsorship. So I can see playing this over and over again if I'm considering taking on a sponsee. From their experiences, we have learned that a true concept of our 12-step obligation must be very broad to cover its purpose. For purpose of identification, it's helpful to distinguish between the daily acts of carrying the message, okay, like helping out in a meeting and phoning somebody and such, and the more complex duty of actual sponsorship, which the big book refers to as working with others. So remember, this book comes after the big book was written. And when the big book was written, they didn't have sponsorship. They were only just they'd only just codified their 12 steps. So working with others was the initial take on how we're supposed to help sponsor, but they didn't even use the term back then. In this little red book, which is just, what was it, Amy, 10 years or something afterwards?
1945.
Yeah, so sponsorship is discussed now as a word in the next section of this chapter. So you're going to find instructions in here that are based on chapter 7 of the big book, but they're more direct and they're actually more complete in my take of it. We can readily see that the member who sponsors carries the message, but a member can carry the message without sponsoring another alcoholic. In fact, much more time is spent on such AA activities than sponsorship. This works in the best interest of our fellowship. It gives everyone something to do, including the newcomers, so making coffee, doing chairs, who may feel too inexperienced to be of any help. And as was pointed out to me at the very beginning, you can only give away what you've got. So when we come in the door, it's okay to be a taker. There are many ways of carrying the message besides sponsorship. Some of these activities appear in the following list. And now there's going to be 15 things that are listed here of how you can do sponsorship without necessarily as a sponsor. 1, the most convincing message we can carry to alcoholics is our own example of contented sobriety, just by turning up and showing up. 2, making calls with older members who are sponsoring a new member. Don't be afraid to reach out to each other. 3, the example of regular attendance at AA meetings or visiting outside AA meetings when we're away from home. 4, making hospital calls upon members. 5, telephone calls to new members. I'll never forget someone in the mountain group phoned me the first time, and I was so shocked that somebody wanted to talk to me. I was like without words. Can you imagine me without words? And she's a dear friend today. Friendly talks with persons after meetings, the parking lot, right? Particularly with newcomers or those who are having trouble living the program. We see that happen in Meditated 8 with our after meeting, and I see it happen in the physical parking lot at the Whistler Mountain Group all the time. 7, by owning the book, by owning Alcoholics Anonymous, by encouraging other alcoholics to buy it and study it for AA understanding. Okay, so being involved in a study group. 8, by lending our books or by passing out our literature to interested persons. I've dropped off several of the brochures for the hospital and doctor's profession and stuff in my local medical clinic, and they were really unaware of AA. So you can often, and they were interested in the literature, and they've handed pamphlets out. 9, assuming the duties and obligations that will help our fellowship. And so that's like many of these are committees now that we're going to talk about on this list, actual AA committees. Talking with relatives or associates of drinking alcoholics. That's by explaining to them that alcoholism is a disease and how we arrest it in AA. So that's when we're called out to speak to the family members of someone who's still struggling. 11, By telling the AA story to clergy members, doctors, judges, educators, employers, or police officials, if we know them well enough, to further the AA cause or to help out a fellow member. Might get you out of a speeding ticket if you say you're on your way to your meeting. I've heard it's happened. 12, by speaking before other groups or conducting meetings in our own group, just like what we're doing here, guys. 13, by making a reasonable pledge of our energy, time, and money to the fellowship. And notice it says reasonable there. We want to have some balance in our lives. 14, by our obvious belief that we've received help from a higher power. And 15, by making AA our way of life. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. The title is Sponsorship, Working with Other Alcoholics. Sponsorship represents the ultimate in AA giving. By this sharing act, persons on reprieve from insanity, and I like that, reprieve from insanity, right? We're only getting a temporary reprieve, conditional, right? Or alcoholic death. It's not giving us a lot of options here. Sharing my recovery with others who want to escape this same penalty. So I know of those three choices which one I've taken. This act is not entirely charitable, since to withhold help is to lose our own reprieves. I only keep this if I give it away. So now we're at the top of 134. Sponsorship, the dynamic factor of AA growth, fills three definite requirements. This is important. 1, it's going to help us maintain our own sobriety, but not just sobriety. It says contented sobriety. You're going to feel better about yourself. 2, it helps, right? You're going to help someone else arrest their alcoholism. And 3, here's that word we focused on before in 11, it kills complacency and progressively replenishes the ranks of our fellowship. What does that mean? In other words, I stop being in self-pity and feeling sorry for myself. And by helping others, I'm going to grow the ranks of AA so that they're going to be able, it's a pyramid scheme is what this thing is, in more ways than one. Okay, so now if you got your markers ready, we're on key idea number 7. So this is the first idea, but it is number 7 of the 12th step in the second part, right? The principle of working with others is sound, as it is founded upon the ageless axiom, give and you shall receive. So the key idea is that sentence, and it means the more we give love, the greater our capacity to receive love will increase. Wrap your head around that. Took me a second. The more we give love, the greater our capacity to receive love increases. 12-step work integrates our personalities and aids spiritual development. We cannot act the daily role of good counselors, hiding our acts in anonymity, without finally becoming better persons for it. In other words, we don't go around telling everybody everything we're doing. We just gradually become a person with humility. Likewise, we gain many spiritual blessings as we give unselfishly of our time and experience to suffering alcoholics. These rewards are intangible, but of inestimable worth. And what's inestimable? Oh boy, here we go. It's not measurable. You can't estimate it. Bigger than infinity. As they bring us peace of mind, self-respect, and sobriety. The Big Book, that's interesting. That's the first time I've seen that in print, calling it the Big Book instead of Alcoholics Anonymous. The Big Book places real emphasis upon our need for carrying the message by saying, and in quotes, this is an experience you must not miss. And that's from page 89 in How It Works, or in Working with Others in the Big Book. Sponsorship fulfills our need for active service and helps keep us sober. Members who try to render this service are faced with the perplexing question, How do we sponsor best? AA has no specific answer. Each member must plan his or her own method. As a result, there is indecision and often conflicting views about proper procedure. There are many procedures, both good and bad, between which we can discern the right course to pursue. In other words, we've got some options here and we're going to figure out the right way to go to sponsor. Some sponsors are tolerant to a point of harmful indulgence. In other words, you become a codependent. Some are evangelists, some end up preaching. There are the easy does it types who are satisfied with merely getting their prospect to a meeting. That's not doing the program. Others are more exacting in their demands. They work only with real alcoholics and insist their candidates give them full cooperation by trying to understand and practice the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what does that mean, real alcoholics? Well, we know that there's several places, two places in particular that define it in the big book, but in a nutshell, we're not talking here about heavy drinkers that go out on benders. Right, Gary?
That's it.
Okay. This lack of set rules or unified plans for working with others would be most frustrating to a member who had never sponsored without a good source of, in quotes, know-how and practical experience to draw upon. Fortunately, no member will be confused or ignorant about the mechanics of sponsorship if he or she studies the big book. It has all the answers, and that's my experience. They can be found in several chapters. And so if you've done a big book study and you've stopped at page 100, you haven't done a big book study. Because the rest of these chapters, working with others, the doctor's opinion, a vision for you, there is a solution, and the family afterwards, and the 43 histories of recovered alcoholics under personal stories are also part of the book. But having said that, the other chapters that I've just mentioned are continuations of the 12th step. They're very clear directions on how to live a sober life and how to practice these principles in our daily affairs. But I digress, that's another study. It is not difficult to establish a successful sponsorship procedure if we follow the suggestions given in those chapters. And so what you're going to get now, I love this, and I had no idea this was in here, is the Coles Notes, the summary of all those 64 pages. We may safely draw upon the experience of our founders who offer the AA fellowship as evidence that their plans work. In other words, the proof is in the recovery. Borrowing freely from their advice and drawing heavily upon their experience, we present this sponsorship guide, hoping it will help these who work with alcoholics. And I know for the rest of my sponsorship, I will keep the following close to hand to help guide me. The sponsor. An honest interpretation of Step 12 permits no altering of its principles. The simple wording of the step implies its intent. It outlines the qualifications of a sponsor. It identifies the people we will work with and suggests a way of life to keep us capable of future sponsorship. The first requisite of sponsorship are sobriety and a personality change, right? There we are again, psychic change based on an active concept of God's will. In other words, the sponsor has to be spiritually connected. You can't pass on and teach what you haven't experienced. We qualify for these things by living the 12 steps. This is followed by knowledge of the AA program and the purpose of Step 12. In other words, you got to study this stuff. This is accomplished by working with a special group of people, I'll say, namely us, alcoholics. We're special.
We're special.
Following this plan brings success with our prospects. Deviating from it, so don't vary from this, we invite failure and AA headaches. In other words, there's a lot of 100 years of good advice here. We don't have to reinvent this. We can just follow this. and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think you're going to be blown away by how simple the directions are.
I just wanted to say something that I was told that I really liked. It was a definition of wisdom. And wisdom, the way it was explained to me, is knowledge combined with experience. And, I've tried to stop drinking quite a few times on my own knowledge, the self-knowledge that I gotten along the way. And it wasn't until I combined it with somebody else's, like the wisdom or the experience that was provided within the program, that it actually became wisdom. So knowledge plus experience becomes wisdom, which is what we're working on here.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree with that. Okay, so the first requisite, okay, we said that. Following this plan, so not deviating, sticking with the plan as outlined, will bring us success with our prospects. Deviating from it, we invite failure and AA headaches. Some say we go on trial each time we sponsor. The life of the newcomer and the future of AA could easily depend upon the quality of our sobriety and the manner in which we share it with other alcoholics. I know it keeps my program in check when I have to explain it to you. It takes me into a deeper experience with it, and it benefits me. Working with others is always a serious matter for an AA and the prospect. Got your highlighters? Here comes key idea number 8. First, they look to us for counsel to help them overcome their drinking problems. That's what they'd look first. Do we want to stop drinking, right? That's why I came in here. Semicolon. Then they look to the AA program for rehabilitation of their lives. And you might have heard that we came in here for our drinking and we stayed for our thinking. So you can write that in the margin because that's where that originates. And another thing I've added here is we may be fearful of becoming a sponsor. All that is needed is trust in your own higher power, knowing that the sponsee also has a higher power looking after their end. You're going to do your best job, but at the end of the day, you got to let go. And that's kind of an Al-Anon principle too, is their higher power is going to connect with them or not. It's not your journey. Younger members can prepare themselves for sponsoring by a close study of Chapter 7, and that was working with others again. It takes us right back to the big book and the other related chapters in the big book. Short on know-how, they will have to offset their lack of experience with knowledge and enthusiasm gained from older members. In other words, if you get, and I do this all the time, if I get stuck with somebody I'm working with, well, ask Gary, how many times do I pick up the phone? This brings up an important phase of carrying the message that we will comment on briefly. More to come here. Double sponsorship, that's another title. Hang in there with me, you guys. We're going to get through this, and you can go back and listen to it in the recording, but we really want to motor on. The value of double sponsorship has been recognized by many groups. Some now make it their standard practice. I'd never heard of this before. Examples of its effectiveness started with AA's inception. Bill W. had little success with alcoholics until he and Dr. Bob started working with them together. The need for dual sponsorship is just as great today. Among its advantages are such things as preparedness, safety in numbers, efficiency, good presentation, and better follow-up. And this is going back to a lot of physical intervention. We're never to go, and you'll see these directions are coming up. We don't approach the newcomer by ourselves. From the standpoint of preparedness, 2 members can plan and follow a better course of action than one. Paired up, we lessen the element of danger and provide work for a younger member. The prospect gets 2 views of AA. Follow-up is more complete. So it doesn't have to be just down to us, guys. 2 of you can take on somebody if they're particularly challenging. Buddy up with someone and co-sponsor. An older member with a successful record of working with alcoholics never sponsors alone. He or she always calls in a younger person to help him or her and insists they both read Chapter 7 before making the call. So they remind themselves by going back to the big book because there's good directions there. Except, there's an exception, emergency cases. The results have been helpful for the prospect and for the younger members, who, in turn, makes this practice his or her own future sponsorship procedure. Literally defined, a sponsor is one who willingly binds him or herself to answer for another's default. The AA interpretation differs in that we bind ourselves to help the newcomer answer for his or her own default by indoctrination to a new way of life. Those of us who sponsor improve our pattern of procedure with each new experience. There are many things to learn about helping the alcoholic who still suffers, in quotes. Foremost among those is knowing the quality of our own sobriety. So we got to have a look at ourselves first and do a little bit of a stock check on where we're at in our own sobriety. We should be critical of our own development in this respect, as it's impossible to share qualities that we do not possess ourselves. And even though Bob and Bill only had 6 months in between them, they had a working idea of how they were our forebears. Today, we don't let not having finished the 12 steps stop us from talking to another, but we have the benefit of all the years of experience and many people to call. On the other hand, even though we are well qualified, we cannot share with alcoholics who reject our help. And that's, if they don't want your help, you got to walk. It is pointless to try. I've tried. We drop them for a while, but leave the AA door open. And it may not be my door that they knock on next, but I leave the door open. So they may call later if they have a change of heart. I stay in touch with people. I'm here for them. And I can only meet them where they're at. And if they're not willing to really give themselves to this simple program, it's not the right point to start it. Considering this aspect of sponsorship, it seems prospective members must have definite qualifications to be eligible for our fellowship. Such is the case, but the qualifications are extremely limited. The alcoholics, and here we go, guys, it's the tradition, the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. Okay? And that's also found in the foreword to the first edition. And any edition. There are other minor qualifications for membership in special groups, but the main requirement is the same for all. If you think you need help and have an honest desire to stop drinking, you're in the right place. And it may take a while, but you'll get it. Another significant part of sponsorship, in which several members can carry the message, is that one of starting new groups or working with weaker ones. We need this service, which in turn strengthens us by giving our members a constructive outlet for their latent AA energies. In other words, supporting your home groups is a valuable service. Although the benefits from working with others are shared mutually by the sponsor and the prospect, whether that's in an individual or a group, we seldom think about ourselves when making a 12-step call. And isn't that what this is all about, getting out of self? Okay, marker's ready. Here it comes. Key idea number 9. Herein lies a cardinal virtue of sponsorship. It's central to the whole deal. Here's the thing to highlight. It is the momentary loss of self-centeredness. While I'm helping you, I'm not thinking of myself. This attitude, engendered by a desire to share our recovery with other alcoholics, is a sign of healthy AA growth. As we share, we grow in AA stature and increase our chances for a happy, sober life. Every AA member is a potential sponsor, and most members aspire to sponsor successfully. Our great ambition is to help alcoholics recover from their illness. Success often rewards our efforts, but we never get discouraged if the prospect fails to cooperate. Many calls must be made before we find an alcoholic desperate enough to accept AA. Our duty is to find them. How is this done? Where can they be located? So this is how we find our sponsees now, and it's the next section called Locating Prospective Members. A successful, harmonious plan for locating AA prospects and for constructive future work with them can be easily established by any progressive AA group. An explicit outline for such a plan is given in Chapter 7 of the Big Book. Have you not heard this enough times, guys? You got to read Chapter 7 when you're going to sponsor. Wise members will agree to adopt it as an authoritative guide for sponsorship. Thus, they work in unison, with all members having the same source of our founders' experience at their command. And I like that. It's the same as teaching riding. If you teach the masters, the message is consistent and every animal will respond the same way. There are many sources to reach prospective members. Widespread AA publicity provides contacts through telephone and written requests, and now through the internet, right? AA.org, there's a treasure trove there. This important service has greatly enlarged our fellowship. When they wrote this book, they'd be mind blown if they saw what we did online now. Its value is well established, but members regress when we depend upon it alone. We go backwards, right? We go backwards if we depend upon that alone. All members must carry the message to develop AA's growth and gain personal experience if we are to continue the source of referrals started by our founders. So here's the pyramid effect, right? This is passing it on, the ripple effect. How is this accomplished? Find your answer in the Big Book. Go back and read Chapter 7. Read paragraph 3 in the chapter, Working with Others. These are directions, guys. It says, and I quote, "Perhaps you're not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They will be only too glad to assist you. Now you just have to go into a Zoom meeting filled with them. But it's also important to let your doctor know, as I have, if somebody comes to you as messed up as I was, give them my number." Good public relations reward such efforts and eventually start requests for help by alcoholics who need AA. We gain the most from following these calls because we have had a part in their making. Highlighters ready. By educating we're on the top of 142 now. Hang in there with me, guys. By educating doctors, the clergy, judges, police officials, and industrial personnel regarding the type of people AA can help, we will avoid, okay, this is key. Here's the highlight. We will avoid flooding our ranks with an unwieldy preponderance of non-alcoholics. In other words, what we're doing is we're telling these judges, police officials, and stuff what an alcoholic looks like against a heavy drinker, the binge drinker who's gone out there and had may have ended up in jail or the hospital or wherever, but it's just an unfortunate one-off. We're talking about the real alcoholics. So that's come up again. And you might have heard this conversation going on in the rooms about it being filled, their heavy drinkers are taking up seats of real alcoholics. I say all welcome, because many heavy drinkers are on their way to becoming true alcoholics. So early intervention, I think, is a good thing. Inquiries, so that was key number 10. We will avoid flooding our ranks with unwieldy preponderance of non-alcoholics. Key 11 follows right after. Next paragraph. Inquiries from the families of alcoholics are often overlooked as a means of locating new prospects. So in other words, we take the call at the service office from the worried partner or the child or whatever, and we locate new prospects and they're put into the AA system now. We have committees that look after that and contact members. If an alcoholic wants no part of AA, we can still carry the message to inquiring relatives. And I say add there, introduce and mention Al-Anon as well, because they need help too, dealing with the chaos creator, the alcoholic. Those who ask for help are entitled to an explanation of the disease, alcoholism, We should tell them about the 12 steps and how the program will work for the sick member of their family if that person will accept it. They will find a means of enlightening alcoholics. Leave them some AA literature. Good practical advice. I keep a whole series of brochures at home. And you'll have planted a seed in their minds that may develop a good future prospect for AA. You never know what you say at a meeting or what you share in anything to do with AA, what it's going to mean to them. I've had that come back at me many times. I remember you said this a year ago, or I remember when I was shut down and I saw you and it gave me some hope. You never know. They will find a means of enlightening alcoholics. Leave them some AA literature, you planted a seed. Okay, other sources of prospective members for AA can be developed through newspapers, radio, and television. That's the AA ads that say just general office and such, telling you where to turn to. Tact and good judgment must be used, however, as no publicity is far better than bad publicity that might harm AA or rob it of dignity and appeal. In all public relation contacts, our principles of anonymity should be thoroughly understood. It is our obligation to see that that's respected. All groups should consider their objectives and motives before releasing a publicity program. Okay, key idea 12. Here we go. We must protect our personal anonymity. Motives prompted by a desire to exalt AA or its members, in other words, to blow our own horn, that's just plain wrong. Our aim is service by the principle of attraction, not promotion. We can help those who suffer from alcoholism find their way into AA. Now here we've got helpful hints for sponsors. The following suggestions are from data found in Chapter 7 of the Big Book. So again, you guys, if you haven't heard it yet, how many times did they have to tell us? Chapter 7 of the Big Book. Oh, 7 so far. Oh, no, you got it. You got it. It's in the 7. I love that. Thank you, Laura. We trust they will prove helpful as a supplementary guide for study of this chapter. So it's saying, here's your core instructions. The Big Book is a supplement as far as working here. Certainly, the most impressive thing we have to offer the prospect is our example of a sober, happy, and purposeful life. It's very annoying to come in and see a bunch of smiling, laughing faces, but it's my reality. Remember, the prospect is sick in body, mind, and spirit. Your triangle. We alone can help this person recover. Alcoholics minimize their drinking when interviewed before relatives. So, yeah, they're not going to tell anyone the truth in front of my relations or my partner. So see them privately if you can. Good practical advice. Go have a coffee. Yeah, watch the jitters. The family can fill in additional facts later. To help the alcoholic, we must know his or her type of drinking, habits, hobbies, religion, business, financial condition, and what cooperation to expect from the family. So in other words, we go for coffee and we get to know them. Okay, next one. Top of 44, highlighters out. This is key idea. If the alcoholics need hospital care, help the person get it by making the necessary arrangements. Okay, pay attention to this, because if you read the first chapter of this book, it paid as much attention about detox and making sure that you withdraw under medical care, not the way I did it and almost killed myself. Okay, so we must remember there's a very real possibility of death occurring during unmonitored detoxing. So go back to the readings of the first step in this book, because it's very clear. We need, and remember the 3 sides of the triangle. Okay, it's about the physical as much as the mental and the spiritual. We should tell our stories and get newcomers to tell theirs. Avoiding evangelism. In other words, we're not going to preach. We're just going to explain how AA functions, how it's worked for us. And that's the I, right? I. And how it can work for them. Here's what it did for me. Stress anonymity. Label alcoholism as an illness. I had to hear, and I'll never forget, meaningful for me, in the Whistler Mountain group, Jill, you're not a bad person. You just do bad things when you drink. and use. And that's true. Leave the AA literature if a prospect is interested. Leave him a big book. Suggest he or she call after reading it. If the person believes he or she is alcoholic and wants to join our fellowship, suggest reading the big book. We should just not push the person into AA. Let the alcoholic ask for it. You're ready when you're ready. The newcomer should know about the spiritual aspect of AA, particularly that it is not a religion, but one's own concept of God as we understood him. When the newcomer indicates willingness to join AA just to help the family, discourage the idea. You don't do it for other people. We got to come in here to save our own lives. Explain why it won't work. Point out alcoholism is an illness that the person must recover from. He or she is sick, not the family. I'm coming in here because I'm sick. My family's pretty sick too, but I'm coming in here for me. When the newcomer indicates willingness to join, AA just to help the family. Oh yeah, we've done that. Sorry. The alcoholic's family should not be ignored though. Tell them why the AA program will become a part of the prospect's daily life. Invite their cooperation. It often makes the difference between success and failure. So when people suddenly start spending more time with us than their families when they get sober, sometimes I've had to go in and explain to a partner or a family about what we're actually doing. It couldn't come from the person themselves. Problems involving the lending of money, keeping alcoholics in our homes, divorce, spiritual development, family quarrels, and shunning drinking places are explained on pages 96 to 103 of Chapter 7 of the Big Book. It is well to study them in preparation for these contingencies. Recognize the sick and lonely condition of the alcoholic. Be friendly, but don't coddle the person. Don't wrap them in cotton wool. Treat each case with reason. Everyone's unique. Although we may help the newcomer to a meeting at first, we choose not to make it a fixed habit. The guys want to go and get there on their own. Emphasize the need to attend meetings. Portray the opportunity as a life-saving privilege, and nothing must deter us. We don't need a chaperone. Be worthy of your prospect's trust. Counsel your person wisely. Advise the purchase of a big book, or I give them one. See that the prospect studies it for a better understanding of this new way of life. I tell my sponsees 90 meetings, 90 days, attend the Bronx Big Book study, or listen to the recordings of the Big Book study. Teach the newcomer the value of 12-step living and reliance on God's help for recovery. Newcomers should not lean upon us too heavily, or they may fail to develop enough AA strength to succeed with our program. I can't put anybody on a pedestal in here, because should their sobriety fail, that doesn't mean my will. Advice to the newcomer. Okay, we're on the bottom of 145. We're getting there, guys. For the best results, consider yourself a patient in AA for the arrest of an incurable disease. I like that. I can come in here as a taker. I'm a patient. Determined to get the utmost from your treatment. I'm a patient in treatment. Go on the theory that AA can do without you, but that you cannot live without AA. Avoid unreasonable demands upon your sponsor. Never get the idea that by slipping you let your sponsor down. You're the person who'll suffer. God is the one who will let you, God is the one you will let down. Yeah, I know that one. Key idea 14. Got your marker? Buy a big book and follow its advice. Here's what to highlight. It is foolish to assume you can recover from alcoholism without a book which contains the recovery instructions. Anyone else need to hear one more time? You need the book. And what chapter do you need? 7. Abstain from weakening the AA program with 12-step substitutions, or you'll water it down to a point of drunkenness. The AA program. What's the AA program? 12 steps. not just going to meetings. Don't take AA lightly. It may be your last chance for sanity or sobriety. This is no joke. It's a killer disease, and this program has saved my life, or I wouldn't be sitting here, and nor would many of you having this meeting. Put nothing ahead of it. I can't. If I'm not sober, I can't give anybody anything. Okay, this is key idea 15 with your marker. Approach it with honesty, humility, open-mindedness, willingness, and appreciation. That's key idea 15. In other words, don't romance the disease. Never lose sight of the fact that it's got a contract on your ass. It's very patient, and it's just waiting to take you down if you don't exercise. In my experience, if I don't exercise this program, I'm back in my state, in my disease. And I can't afford that because you make me want to live today, and my higher power is trying to give me a new program for living, and I love it, and I owe it all to AA. And we did it with just 9 minutes over. We got through the second division of this 12th step. Back to you, Gary.
Thanks for the marathon session there, Jill. I think, I think the important thing is that you can take this and divide it up into little chunks over the next couple of weeks and listen to sections again and pick up the key points in that as they show up again. But, I think part of what you're saying, like chapter 7 keeps showing up over and over and over and over again, how it works, into action. But one of the things that one of our older members here likes to say, is that this is not a novel. The big book is not a novel. It's a textbook. And it's meant to be used like that. It's meant to be referenced constantly. And also, like you said earlier, the big book, as a sponsor, whenever I get a question from a sponsee and I'm not sure what to do, the answer is always go back to the big book. I never try to give my opinion. It's always like, well, let's go back to the book and see what it says about that situation. And in my experience, I don't think I've ever come across situations where I can't find some reference or something that helps provide some guidance in the big book. So, like I say,
and I can tell you, if you're going to phone Gary and ask for the answer, he's going to tell you to go find it. He doesn't do homework for you.
I remember in the early days, Jill was, like, how does this thing work? And she was very defiant. And my answer was every time she came on a meeting, she got to read how it works. And eventually she started to understand that the answer was how it works.
Man, they meant
Not sure
it
if she got tired of
literally.
reading it or she just, it finally sunk in. But yeah, there's
Well, then,
no there's no better reward in this program than helping somebody and watching their life start to come back together and the lights come on, and that's, like Jill said, there's no other reward that needed in this program other than, helping somebody else to keep yourself in good, very fit spiritual condition. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys all stuck it out and carried on all the way through this. As far as homework, just to be very quick here, obviously, chapter 7, in the big book.
did anyone
Reason
not
being,
get that?
and the big book, pages 89 to the end of chapter, which is page 103. Take some time to reread the 12 by 12, step 12, and this little red book, what we read tonight. Go back through it again up to the end of page 130. The second division. And I've got down here, I wrote it down again because it really resonated with me. Contemplate the phrase, all things we are searching for become a reality. It's what we talked about tonight, contented sobriety, serenity, and happiness. I mean, what we're looking for in life, my whole attitude and outlook on life changed. Those things became important. That's not where I started this program. I started in a position of fear. My thinking started to change over time, and it's become one of gratitude. And those are the elements that I'm grateful for now. So with that, we'll let it go for tonight and look forward to seeing you all next week. Take a well-deserved few minutes there, Jill, before you make your next
Wow,
call.
good job, Jill. You're such a good reader.
That was a marathon read. I
That was a
enjoyed
lot.
that,
Well
though.
done, Jill.
So
Especially,
good.
it was
I
the
love I
second.
love this little red book.
Oh, don't you? I mean, I have I have to prepare this because I don't know it, right? So I spent several hours with this, especially having to put two meetings in one, and I had a spiritual experience.
Nice.
Like really, it's and if you're trying to help somebody, you can just meet them where they're at and don't sweat it if they're not getting it, as it's in God's time, and that really takes the pressure off trying to help somebody else. I also really like the idea of the two sponsor approach.
That's really nice. That's what my girls did when they were rescuing me. The last time I relapsed, they came in pairs.
Well, it's very clear that they say, any 12-step call, and that's what they're talking about basically is making a 12-step call. Not so much the sponsor, like the official sponsor title at that point, but approaching somebody in the way of a 12-step call. You should always have two people,
Yeah.
both to make sure that you're both on track, but also, like they said, taking somebody who's got some experience and mentoring somebody else. That's how you learn how to make a proper 12-step call is, take somebody along who's not as experienced and give them the opportunity. And if
It's not something to take lightly, because when somebody's drunk, like think about yourself, how irrational and how chaotic we can behave. And I've reached out to other members to accompany me to try help somebody because I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle it by myself. And I'm glad I did. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but you plant a seed. You plant a seed there, and that somebody was willing get into a vehicle to go to where they'd gone off the side of the road and they were drunk, whatever the case may be, wherever you're at. We've all been there. We've all had that humiliating experience. But what I really heard tonight, and I know, Gary, you want to get going on to your next meeting here, but I really heard revitalize and vital over and over again. It's life or death, guys. It's life or death. And I almost killed myself dancing around these rooms. I was on death's door when I finally accepted. So know that this is a matter of not just saving your life, but you can save other people's. And
Yeah.
that is quite an amazing experience when somebody calls you up and said, "You changed my life," or "I heard you," or they say, "I have not had 6 months or 3 months or 4 months since my adult memory, or since ever." And these miracles are happening amongst us every day, and we get to share in being part of that miracle. And I think that's just so cool,
It's
personally.
just one alcoholic talking to another.
Yep.
It's the whole
And I think
foundation.
that's a great note to wrap her on.